Hi, I want today just to talk a little bit about power and its distribution. We've been talking a lot about culture and religion in particular, and we need to bear in mind that, of course, there is this vast structure of real power that exists, or power that is negotiated. And I'll come on to those points. And I'm also very aware that some of you are attempting to tackle the essay on where was power in 1500. And I want to just say a few things. I was planning to speak a little bit about this on Thursday, but I want to get this to you as fast as I can. The first thing to understand about the state structure around 1500, I use that word state structure advisedly. The power structure is that we don't yet have the concept of sovereignty. We don't have the idea of there being a ruler issuing down instructions and people following instructions. Instructions are at best decrees which, do to an extent have a legal sanction, but they are temporary injunctions, and they don't carry the same weight as a decree does in Britain today. And at the same time, we've got the sheer problem of enforceability. How do you enforce these decrees? You haven't got a police force. The most you've got, really, is an army. And you don't want to use an army because, firstly, it's expensive. Mostly it consists of mercenaries. Secondly, it tends to behave badly in inflamed situations. So you've got a problem of actual execution of authority. That's the first thing. And second thing is that power tends to be parcelised throughout the political system. So that nobles have got power, barons have got powers, monasteries have got estates, they've got powers, village headmen have got powers. These powers tend to be almost autonomous. Most of the time, the powers that are exercised are thought to be self-generating, what we call autonomous powers. That they are not powers that are given down by the ruler. They are powers that people have by virtue of the political order, and moreover powers that they have customarily exercised. And remember, customary law is very important. As against that, we have the Roman law principle that all power flows down from top to bottom, and that will create conflicts between, on the one hand, what rulers believe that they are entitled to do, what pleases the prince has the force of the law, but on the other hand, we have the traditional way matters have gone on, i.e. that this is the way things have always been done. That's the first thing. We've got not sovereignty vested in a single figure. What we have is parcelised, distributed sovereignty. If you like, sovereignty exists within the hierarchy, within the divinely ordained order in which society is organised. What we tend to find, and what historians make a lot of, is what we would call, and what historians call in German, Doppelpoligkeit. The Germans, if they can get a long word, they'll use it. Doppelpoligkeit. We call it double polarity. And the idea behind double polarity is that there are two locations of sovereignty. That sovereignty is primarily shared between, on the one hand, the ruler, and the second, on the other hand, the nobility. Some books will call them the estates, but the estates is if the Germans again, they call it die Stände, the estates. The estates contain everything. They contain towns, they contain, in the Tyrol, they contain peasants. These are not power brokers. The estates, it's far better to talk about the nobility, I think, rather than the estates. And the nobility believe that they have got, again, customary powers, customary rights that in Hungary were given to them by the sainted king, St. Stephen, 1038, that their liberties and rights were guaranteed by him. And they regard themselves as having autonomous powers, and that they do not follow the ruler's instructions, they negotiate with him. And we can see this played out in what's called the Tractatus. A lovely word, the Tractatus. It means conversation. And the conversation that takes place in the Diet. And this is not like parliamentary procedure today in Britain. So that's what happens. The king turns up, the ruler turns up, he says, I've got these propositions, this is what I'd like you to do, and the Diet says, mostly the nobility. So I says, oh, wait a minute, don't think we're going to be agreeing to that. You want taxes for this year? What about last year's taxes? What's happened to them? Don't think you can come along here and ask for money when you haven't got a proper spending accounts for last year. And what's all this about troops? Troops cost money. So we're back to where we were in the beginning. So no, we're not going to agree to any of this. It's a bit like the negotiations between the UK and the European Union, which are going on even as I speak to you. Isn't it exciting? I'm really holding my breath. And it is almost the same as if two sovereign entities are negotiating and trying to work out a deal. And what is called an Act of the Diet is in fact a treaty between the nobility and the ruler. So both of these, nobleman and crown, the king, both of these regard themselves as fully autonomous sovereign bodies, and what is called a statute or decision is in fact a treaty between them. And it's normally time limited. They don't say this is going to lapse, but it will lapse every time a new treaty is put forward, which is why people don't think they're very important. They don't bother to collect them. It's an absolute pain for historians to try and work out what diets have done in places like Bohemia and Hungary and Austria, because the records just don't survive. Oh, well, we agreed to this treaty a few years ago, another one's come along, let's bin the last one and we'll muddle through with the present one. So in other words, what we have is a distributed power, a power that proceeds down through the hierarchy to village elders who believe they have autonomously generated powers, that their village communities have got rights, and they, because they're not particularly literate, they learn their rights off by heart, and they sing them. Wonderful. They sing their rights. And when people come along and say, and what are your rights? They start singing to tell people what their rights are. And they believe those rights are traditional, that they can't be countermanded, and that they are of ancient and historic provenance. We hear a lot these days about soft power. Soft power. it's one of the things that the BBC uses to try and extract money. Oh, we've got soft power influence across the world. Oh, yes. Everybody listens to us. People go on about soft power a lot, and it's about, if you like, cultural codes and cultural influence that people are expected to have, and that there's a sort of way of life that people adopt. I always thought it was rather amusing when one of these Al-Qaeda terrorists was caught. He was wearing a New York baseball cap. So not that type of American soft power in terms of fashion was not particularly persuasive in any other way. Soft power. Soft power is most obviously at this time. It's something that the church has. The church can't usually deploy armies. If it has to deploy an army, it has to declare a holy league and get people to do the work for it. They have got an army in the papal state, but outside that, they've got no force. They've got no forces. Their power is, if you like, soft, but it's very powerful. It is very, very persuasive. Threaten to excommunicate. You've got a moral leadership, again, a historic leadership. I mean, popes have been around now for 1,500 years. That's a long time, if you think about it. 1,500 years from now is 3,500 AD. I wonder whether we'll have negotiated with the European Union by then. Anyway, so one could look and one could think of the soft power influence that the church has, of the soft power influence that some of the people I've mentioned, the soft power influence of pamphleteers, the soft power influence of alchemists, the type of people who tell Frederick V of the Palatinate that he is the midnight lion who is going to take over and defeat Antichrist. This is all elements of soft power, elements of persuasion. They're ways of getting things done. One is to hit people until they do it. That used to be the South African technique. And the other method is to persuade them that they need to do it anyway. And these forces of persuasion need to be taken into account as well. And then finally, I want to mention something that's been become quite fashionable in the last 20 years. You're a most unusual quarter, a Nazi theorist. The Nazis were pretty short on theorists. But they do have one. He's called Carl Schmitt. He needs to be treated with caution. And some of you who do the political ideas course will come into contact, I think, with Carl Schmitt. And Carl Schmitt, it's SCHMITT, if you want to check him up. Carl Schmitt has the idea of the state of exception. When the chips are down, where does power lie? And he thinks, really, in terms of the Reichstag fire, 1933, that when the emergency hits, who takes over? Who sorts out the mess? And of course, it's the Führer sorts out the mess, which Schmitt thinks is a jolly good thing. But we can use Schmitt's analysis. When we are dealing with crises, who takes over and who resolves them? And we can point to a number of people. There's the crisis that really hits is the religious crisis. Who deals with it there? Well, Charles V attempts to deal with it militarily. But if one actually looks, it's the Austrian dukes, urged on by soft power bishops, who really lead the way. And when it comes to the Turks, it's actually the provincial estates of Styria, the provincial noblemen meeting in their diet in Styria and Lower Austria, who take the lead in organising the financial aspects of defence. The lead is taken by the emperor, in Vienna by Ferdinand, and in desultory fashion by Maximilian, who immediately makes peace. But when it comes to critical dealing with the Turks, one can see, yes, the emperors are playing a role, but so also are those diets in Styria and Lower Austria. They have to be, because they've been raided, and they need to organise a defensive capacity, and they do this by offering huge amounts of money and working out a financial mechanism for getting that money across the border into Hungary to sustain border fortresses. So again, we come back to almost where we started, that when we look at the state of exception, we can see that, yes, emperors play a role, dukes play a role, the provincial diets, they also play a role. That parcellisation of power even plays out in the state of exception. Thank you.